Hey, I'm John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. In this video, I'm going to finish up Citadel's Adeptus Mechanicus Archaeopter. In the last video, I got it painted and all the little details put in there, and this one is going to cover the weathering. Now, one thing I did do since the last video, if you watched the last video, you saw the technique I used to paint the wings here, and I was trying to get the effect of this membrane kind of, gradient, and I to be honest, I look back at that and I'm like, what was I trying to do? The beautiful thing about models is if you do something and you don't like it, you can go back and redo it later. So what I've done, just a very simple technique, I just dry brushed some of this Luftwaffe uniform World War II over this. I just took a big fluffy brush like this and I just dry brushed over it to kind of modulate it, and that's actually more of the effect that I was wanting to get in the first place. Was just more of a blended look like that. I realized in this scale trying to get a membrane look is just a little too much. So anyway, that's one change I've made since the last video, is just dry brushing over that to kind of blend that a little, but I like it better now. Now the first step I'm going to do is chipping, and this is my plan for the chipping. I'm going to work on the assumption that this underside color is the base color, primer color, whatever you want to call it. And I'm building that assumption in because the interior is also this color. And so given that, I'm going to chip the red back to this Morghast bone color. So I'll use the tan for the chipping on the red, and then the chipping on the tan, I'm probably just going to use a chipping brown or something like that, maybe a dark gray. I haven't decided how much rust tone I want to put on this model. I do want to do some rust tones on it, but I'm not sure how much. But that's going to be the logic that I follow, is that this will chip back to the Morghast bone, and then there will be some darker chips in that, and this will chip back to the darker color. And then, of course, there will be some that will be sponge applied, brush applied. I may use different techniques for how I apply the chips, but that's going to be the logic behind it. I'm going to start with sponge chipping, and I've got some Morghast bone in my palette, and I've put it on a piece of sponge that I clipped off, and I'm just dabbing off that paint, and I'm going to go in here and begin applying it to the front. Now I'm going to go ahead and make sure that some of it gets onto the underside layer so that it looks like the chip just continues down into that. I want it to look, organic to the whole thing. Now I'm not going to do this much chipping on the rest of the model, but what I figure is that various leading edges that are exposed to the elements, and like when it's landing, it's throwing up dirt and dust and rocks, I would imagine. So I want the leading edges on elements like the wing and this fitting here. I'll leave that. I started to wipe that off because I thought that was too much, but I'll go with it. But just on these leading edges, they're going to be a little heavier because that's where you're going to see the wear the most. And then as I go further back, I'll just do it along some of the edges, like just lightly, or try to do it lightly along this back edge here. Now remember, chipping can do more than just provide chips. It also is a way of providing edge highlighting. So if you're wanting to enhance the volumes on your model, then you can use it in that way by, like here, I can get a little chipping in on the edges of these panel lines like that, because what that'll do is just help differentiate those two areas, and it'll make those lines stand out a little more. So you can use it for more than just its intended purpose, but rather have it help you out in a few other ways. But I'll just continue doing this around the model. And just to belabor the point, I guess you'd say, I'll also do it like on the front right up here to get things looking chipped, maybe a little along here, along the leading edge of the door here, and up here. Those are areas that are going to be a little heavier because, you know, they're facing into the airstream, so I'll just add a little more there. Once I have the sponge chipping in place, I thin the paint down quite a bit. It's not runny, but it's definitely thin. And I just go in and I use a fine-tipped brush to just kind of enhance areas that I'd previously chipped with the sponge, or get to areas that I couldn't get to very well with the sponge. And I just add some more along there like that. And one thing to note when you're using acrylics like this, if you get some paint where you don't want it, you can't just wipe it away like that if you do it quick. So keep that in mind. If you get a spot on there that you don't want, it's not necessarily a permanent thing. But I'll use it like that, and I'll use it to add some streaks in like this, just to represent another type of chip, you know, some specific thing flying up there and damaging that. And you can draw a streak on. You can kind of do a vectored chip like this, which goes in a general direction, but is not necessarily one long chip. So there's different ways of doing that. And but just a fine brush. It doesn't have to be a tiny brush necessarily. Just a fine one. I like this one because while it's got a very, very good point, I can load it up with paint, and if I'm careful about my control of it, I can get a lot of chips in without having to keep going back to the palette over and over again. But certainly if what you have is just a very small, very fine-tipped brush, you can use that too. That's the key. The tip of the brush is what you're looking for, something very small. Don't forget to get some chipping along the canopy. I haven't glued this on yet, so I popped it off so I could get some nice chips down around the edge, because this is paint on the real thing and it will chip. For the chipping on the underside, I'm going to use some Rhinox hide from Citadel. It's a dark brown color. It can suggest anything from a composite material underneath to something that's slightly rusted. It's just a good general chipping color. And there's other colors. I mean, anything that's basically a dark brown, if this is the color you're going for, will work. If you want something that suggests less rust but just more chipping, especially if it's, you know, something that you're thinking is going to be suggesting composite, then a dark gray works really good on lighter colors. I'll just go through and apply this like I did on the top, and I'll get a little bit right there on the border where I've got some of the Morghast bone going up onto the red to suggest deeper chips there also. All right, with the sponge chipping in place, I'm going to switch back over to my small brush. And this is, I don't remember if I mentioned it before, but this is a Wargamer detail brush. And I'm just going to add in, as I did before, just some streaks and dots, and just generally getting to areas that maybe were a little harder to get with the sponge, or that I want to develop a little further. With all the chipping in place, it's time to start doing some panel lining, or shading as it's often referred to in the Games Workshop world. For this, I'm going to be using two different Citadel shades, Agrax Earth Shade, which is essentially a dark brown, and Non Oil, which is black. Now, they do have gloss versions of these. I'm using the matte versions. If you're not familiar with what a shade is, or with applying acrylic washes, they're not like enamels or oils, in that with an enamel or an oil, you would put the wash down and then later come back and clean up any excess. With acrylic shades, they don't clean up in the sense that you don't go back and wipe them down or anything like that. So you want to be more careful in the placement, but they have the benefit of drying very fast. And if you have any sensitivities to enamel odor or anything like that, these are perfect because they're just water-based, so they have no oil. These are also really good to use with gunplay. You won't run into any problems with getting it in the joints or anything like that. But what I'm going to do is, for the metallic areas and the mechanical areas, I'm going to use the Nuln Oil because I want to suggest more shadow than dirt. But for the panel lines and around the bolts and things like that, on both the brown, and the tan, and the red, I'm going to use the Agrax Earthshade. 1, because it's a warm color, so it'll go with both of those. And 2, it's going to just start suggesting some dirt. In later steps, I'm going to be adding dirt effects in, earth effects, so it'll help sell that. But I'm going to start off with treating these metallic parts with some Nuln Oil. Now you can work from a palette, put some of this on your palette, but I just use it right out of the little lid here. And initially what I want to do is I want to put some on these metal parts, and I'm going to completely coat the things that are already in lead belcher because I want to make those look, one, I want to matte them down. I don't want them to be as shiny, but I want them to have more of a grimy, steely look than this metallic look. I'm also going to apply it fairly heavily along the raised detail here because I want to suggest shadow, and then I'm going to completely coat the black areas in Nuln Oil just to add a little bit of a filter to help modulate my attempts at kind of a membrane type look. I like where it's at, but to be honest, I tested it on the other wing and I liked the way it looked out, or it came out. So I'm just going to apply this really heavily, and there's no magic to it. You just kind of slap it on there. Now, if you're not wanting this to pool up anywhere, you do have to be careful about where it goes because it will leave tide marks when it dries. Now, because I'm wanting this to be kind of dirty and oily looking, I'm not going to worry too much about it. So I'm going with a fairly heavy application here. I'm not going to put it on the Balthazar gold parts, these parts right here, because I want them to retain their metallic look, the shiny metallic look, just as a point of visual interest. But the rest of it, I'm going to go in fairly heavily like that and develop those shadows and add a bit of a tint or a filter to those black parts. For these tighter areas that I want to drop in some Nuln Oil, I'm going to switch to a liner brush just to make it a little easier to get it down in there without getting too much staining everywhere else. If I get some outside of it, I'm not going to worry because I'm going to come back later and use Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade to suggest fluid leaks and stains and oil leaks and so forth. So I could just develop any place that I get too much, I can just develop that into a stain later on. But I am trying to be neat here. With the Nuln Oil in place, I'm going to switch over to the Agrax Earthshade. And this is going to be for not only the recesses around the model, but also for the raised, giving some definition to the raised detail. Now I do try to be careful, especially around the raised detail, because this will this will leave tide marks. And while I'm okay with that, I mean, it's just part of using the product, I do try to be careful. Now, one of the things that you can do, knowing that it's going to use tide marks or leave tide marks, I can't speak this morning, is you can work it in such a way to suggest grease stains or chips or something like that. You can even go back later and touch it up, like on the bolt detail. I'll put a little bit of the Agrax Earthshade. Well, that wasn't a little bit. And you see how I just quickly did that with my finger and it left a little streak. So there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate the tide marks. One of the things I'll do is I'll come back and on a lot of these bolts, I'll just add a touch of Morghast bone back into it to bring out the highlight, and that bolt will once again stand out from the shadowing around it. But these dry really quick, and I like them because they allow me to continue working without having to, set it aside and wait a long time for oils or enamels to dry, which is important for me, not only from a standpoint of making videos, but I like to model. I don't like to wait to model. I like to model. So I accept what they bring to the table in terms of, I guess you'd say, weaknesses, because I like the strengths that they bring to the table more than their weaknesses bother me. So that's modeling philosophy for today. Anyway, I'll continue going around the model and there's a lot of bolt detail on this thing, so it will take me quite a while, but it's going to really help that detail pop out. A quick painting step I need to take is to paint in this window here. I want it to look kind of like it's glass, but kind of shiny too, so I've already backed it with lead belcher, and then I'm going to start a process that will use Cantor Blue as its base color. All right, I'll get just a little bit on my palette, thin it with 3 brushfuls of water. Now I'm going to imagine that the light is going to be coming from up here, so it's going to be lighter up here but getting darker down towards this corner. Get some paint on my brush, but I'm going to offload just about all of it. And I'll start painting from this corner back down to the other corner. It's really thin. Notice that it leaves more paint at the end of the brush stroke, so that's why I'm going from this corner back. Give it a quick blast from the hairdryer between each application. This time I'm going to start just a little less into that corner, but still bring it back to the other corner. I'll continue the process with each successive layer, starting just a little further back, but going all the way back to that corner. That's where the most color is going to build up. All right, that's starting to look a little bit like glass or some kind of thing you look through. I'm going to grab some contrast paint, this Pterodon turquoise. Get a little in my palette, 1 big brush full of water. First, I'm going to drop this into the recesses to kind of darken those down a bit. I'm going to get some more, and I'm going to unload my brush fairly good. And then I'm just going to pull this color back across the whole thing. Okay, I'm not real good at blending, but I can live with that. Now I want to do a little bit of streaking on it, so just a very little bit. So I'm going to use this Agrax Earth Shade. I'm just going to use this cheap liner brush right here. I'm going to get just a little bit on the brush. I'm going to offload most of it. And I'm simply going to take the brush and holding it back from the end of the brush. I'm just going to make flicking motions down like that, so that I get these just very faint streaks. Now I recommend that you do it really faint at first until you see how it's going to look. But all I'm looking for here is just the barest of tonal difference that will suggest that this is a dirty thing. I don't know how well it shows up. I may have out-subtled myself, but there are some very faint streaks on there. Sometimes the weathering, you can do it more heavy-handed so that it appears good at arm's length or across the tabletop. But then when you look up close, it looks really exaggerated. Kind of like if you've ever been to, say, a play or a musical, that on stage the actors and actresses look, you know, they look normal, I guess you would say. But then when you see them up close afterwards, if you do the meet and greet thing, and you see them afterwards, you see they have all this exaggerated makeup on their face. Well, that's so that from a distance, they look like a face. You don't lose the details. Same way here. So this is more subtle for up-close examination than it is for across the tabletop. I'm going to be doing some weathering here in a minute. That'll be more of the across the tabletop variety. Now, another bit of the weathering that I want to do will take into account the fact that, okay, I'm assuming this thing, that the reason it has wing-looking things is that they flap. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that with all the way the wings look, that there's some kind of flapping going on. And so when it comes in for a landing, there's going to be, even if it's just using its jets, its jet nozzles, there's going to be, as it lands, there's going to be dirt and dust and muck and mud blowing up underneath. That's why I did a little heavier chipping here on the bottom than I did on the top. So it's going to have all that going on, but I figured there's also going to be stuff being splattered. And to make the splatters, I'm going to go again to Agrax Earthshade. And I know I keep using the Citadel products. If you've got something else, if you want to use different things, certainly use those. There's nothing magical about Citadel. I really like them, but I use, you know, Vallejo and well, primarily Vallejo for acrylics, but, you know, I use them interchangeably. But I've just always wanted to completely weather a model in Citadel products and just see, okay, how did that work out? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of this Agrax Earthshade and a handy dandy toothpick like this, and I'm going to load my brush up, and I'm going to do a couple of test flicks here on my paper towel to make sure that I've got a good pattern. Yeah, that'll work. And then I'm just going to start flicking this onto the model. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to just provide some dirt splatters, some mud, something that looks like mud splatters. And you can do this as heavy or as light as you want, but it gives a really cool pattern, really cool effect that you can't really get just with painting stuff on. You could try and paint all these little dots, but it would take you a while. So I'm just going to do this here on the underside of the fuselage, and I'm going to do some on the underside of the wing. Now, there are some areas that these splatters won't get to, and I'm going to try and get up underneath that landing gear, but I'm not going to be too worried if it doesn't do it. I do recommend when you do this that you put a paper towel down, because this stuff will go everywhere, and it will get on everything. So be aware of that. I'm just going to continue doing this, add some more splatters, put some on the bottom of the wings, and move on to the next weathering step. All right, I'm going to go back to my Nuln oil, and I'm going to get a little on my brush. And what I want to do here is just suggest fluid leaks here and there. And I don't know what this little spinny thing is here, but I'm going to make an assumption that it sprung a leak at some point. So I'm just going to lightly stipple on some color. And you can take this as far down the model as you want. You can add multiple layers. If you give that a few seconds, a few minutes to dry, and then put some more over it, it will kind of create a splotchy kind of effect of stains. But you can do this under bolts. You can do this under vents. You can do it where there's mechanical parts going on and pull it on there. You can have it just coming down from anywhere you want, but it creates a very, very convincing, in my mind, oil leak type of stain that sells the notion that, okay, there's something in here that's leaking. So just find different places around the model that you think that might happen and put them on. All right, there's just a few more steps I want to take to get this model finished up. One is I want to add just a little bit of, I guess you'd say, earth effects. Just some dusty, dirty kind of look, just basically along the bottom red parts here. It won't really show up on the tan, but I just want to give just a look like some dirt, dust, whatever, has collected on the lower sides of the aircraft. So I'm going to get some of this Citadel Xandri dust in my palette, and then I'm going to water it way, way down. Just really get it thin, because and I could do this with usually I would employ some Vallejo washes here, because they're already thin, they're already like this. But like I said, I'm just kind of wanting to do this whole model all the way through the weathering with Citadel products, so just to kind of see what it's like to do that. But it's very thin. You can see how thin it is there. And then all I'm going to do is take this very thin paint, and I'm just going to kind of put it on there. Now I've got the brush loaded up, but the way I work this in is I just go along and I keep spreading out that one brush full. You can go back to the palette, certainly, but I just want to try and spread that out as much as possible, because if you let it pool too much, it'll dry and look a little bit tide marky. But if you just keep spreading it out, it's going to dry very, very transparent. It'll go on much more opaque, and it'll dry very transparent and just give you a little bit of a dusty look. And you can even streak some of it down like this here on the lower part, just to sell the notion of dust marks, dust effects. And of course you could do this on more places on the model. I've already worked with this a little bit, and I've done some on the landing gear because it would make sense for it to be there also. But it's just one of those little touches that if someone's examining it close, it just kind of rewards them, that they see a nice little detail, a nice little touch, and hopefully it makes them smile. Maybe not. They may go, wow, why'd you spread all that thin paint all over the model? But anyway, I'm going to work with this a little bit until I get it like I want it and move on. All right, that's done. It's subtle, but I like the way that looks. I want to give some heat effects, some smoke effects to the exhaust nozzles and to the ends of the gun barrels. So it makes it look like, they've been fired, that for these there's, some kind of cordite staining left on it. And for these, of course, that there's, smoke and fire coming out of it. So I just want to give it just a little bit of that look, just to hint at it. I'm just going to go straight into my paint pot here of this Abaddon black, or Abaddon black, or Abaddon black, however you say it, Citadel's black color. And, again, this could be done with Tamiya weathering powders. It could be done with an airbrush. It could be done with oil. There's a lot of ways of doing this. In keeping with the theme of weathering with Citadel, I'm just going to use this. And all I'm going to do is dry brush this just towards the tip of the jet nozzles. I don't want to make the whole thing black because I've already got this kind of steely effect going on there. But I just want just the very end of it to be darkened. I get a little heavier here around the rim of it. If that's more pretty much black, that's okay. And then also down inside the engine nozzle, because that's where all the soot and smoke and everything like that is going to be happening. So if that's a little darker, that's okay. I'll also get just at the end of the gun barrel here. Right now I want to give it a bit of a heat stained look, so I'm going to get just a little bit of this ultramarine blue contrast paint, and I'm going to put that in my palette and then thin it way down with water. I want it to be very thin so I can control it. When you thin paints like this, it gives you the ability to have very great control over how much color is built upon the model. You may have to glaze over several layers, kind of like I did with those windows, but it can give you a lot of control in terms of how it's going to look on your model. Now, I'll go in and I'll get some of this on here, and I'm just going to put that on the end of the nozzle like that. Just fully cover it, just to give it a blued look. I'll also put some on the end of the barrel here. I'm going to grab another contrast paint. This is Blood Angel Red, and I'm just going to put a blob of that over here to the side. And I'm just going to mix a little of this in until I get a purple color. I'm going to take this purple and I'm going to unload a good bit of it. And I'm just going to put this towards the end. I want some of that blue to still show. But then I also want to spread this purple out to give, to try and sell that heat stained effect a little bit. I'll do the same on the end of the barrel. Again, just doing about half of what I did originally with the blue. Your thumb is a good place to unload the brush if you don't have a piece of paper towel nearby. All right, and you can see that it's just giving it just a slight bluish purplish tint. That's all I want. If you Google, I think what I Googled for this was F-16 jet nozzle. You see some soot, you see some bluish, you see some purplish. You don't see the bright garish. Generally, you don't see the bright garish oranges and purples and blues. There's just hints and swirls and you know, bits of blue and purple and soot and even some brownish color. But I thought, you know, in scale, I thought that would do pretty well to try and sell that notion. And it's the same way with the gun barrel. It's just a hint of it. At a distance, it won't be seen at all. But again, up close, examining that, somebody goes, oh, that's a nice little detail there. Hopefully. They might just look at it and say, oh, look, an old fat guy built a toy. I'm just about ready to wrap this up, but one of the concerns I have with the final assembly is attaching the wings to the fuselage, because there's not much of an attachment point. There's a couple little dimples there, and they fit down in here. And I mean, there's some good surface area, and even with a good welding cement like Tamiya Extra Thin, I'm worried about how strong that bond is going to be, particularly because I sell most of my work on eBay when I'm finished with it. Hint, hint. And when I ship this, I don't want this to pop off, because it wouldn't be cool to open up the box and have the wings off of the model. So what I'm planning to do, and I'm going to have to do it off camera because of my eyesight, I'm just going to have to get right up close to it to see, to make sure everything's lined up. But I'm going to take a piece of paper clip and I'm going to cut it off, and I'm going to drill a hole right there in the middle and a corresponding hole right there in the middle so that I can drill through this. What I'll be doing is basically putting it here, just here, and it'll go right up through there, and I'll use super glue to glue this metal rod in place. That'll hold that, and then of course I'll use Tamiya extra thin to bond the plastic. So what I'm hoping is that this extra piece of little rod through there will make it a very strong bond, and it won't come off. The trick is going to be to get the holes lined up between here and here so that the wing sits correctly. So let me play around with this a little bit, and I'll just kind of update you on my progress. All right, I've got a hole drilled here and here, and to my eye, they look like they're lined up. And I'm going to take this piece of the paper clip that I cut off with my wire cutters, and I'm going to glue it in here with super glue, and then test it here. Now, if I need to, I can bend it a little bit to get the shape right, or adjust this hole a little bit. I can widen this hole. I don't need the hole to be precise. I just need some place for the super glue to cling onto. And once I get a good fit with this and this, then I can put a drop of super glue in here, the Tamiya extra thin here, and join the two together. That's the theory. Okay, I managed to not screw this up. So I've got my little piece of metal in there, and I test fitted it, and at first it wasn't fitting down there flush. And I was trying to figure out why, and I realized I was just the slightest bit off. I mean, microns probably. And the dimples that were on the underside, let me show you on the other wing because I haven't modified it yet. See those little dimples right there? I realized the dimples weren't lining up, but for the most part, everything else was. They were only slightly off. So I just cut the dimples off, sanded that down, and once I put that on there, I've got a good alignment on the fit. So my next step, and again, I'll have to do this off camera because it's going to take a little bit of up close looking and some fiddly adjusting, but I'm going to put some super glue here in the hole on this side, and then here, and on the matching face here, I'm going to put a pretty good amount of Tamiya extra thin cement. And I'm going to push the two together and just hold it. And theoretically, what's going to happen is the super glue will bond, and it will give it some strength so that if it has any shear force that hits it, the metal rod will hold it in place. Against most other movement, the Tamiya extra thin will work fine. But hopefully that little metal rod is going to do its job and hold that wing in there pretty good. I thought about seeing if it would just hold it in there fine by itself, but it doesn't. It sags down, so no luck there. Maybe I could have magnetized that. That's something to think about for the future. But let me get this glued on here and get the other one glued on, and this guy's pretty much going to be finished. Okay, well that's it. He's done. This has been such a fun kit. I enjoy just about every kit I build. I have fun with all of them. But my gosh, this one has just really been special. The final result is nothing special. I mean, I like it. I'm happy with it. I wouldn't mind showing it to anybody, obviously. I've got it here. It's not so much how it turned out that I'm so happy with, but the journey in getting here. And I think that's one of the things that's if you're missing that in your modeling, find it. The fun in getting here. I'm actually a bit, I guess you'd say, a bit sad that the model is finished. I enjoyed painting this. I even enjoyed the assembly. There's really been nothing in this that I haven't ultimately had fun with. So anyway, I could go on, but this is a fun model. Yes, it's an expensive model. I think I got it. I pre-ordered it for $90. I think now it's retailing for $100. But the number of hours of enjoyment and the level of enjoyment I got out of this, I think have made it completely worthwhile. I used just a touch of Tamiya extra thin cement to make sure the canopy stayed in place. I glued the landing gear in place. They have multiple positions, but I wanted to make sure that they stayed on. I've got the guns in place on the back side there, and the ones up here on the nose, they got their ammo belts and everything feeding up in there like that, so that's kind of cool. And I like the way the jet nozzles turned out. Those ended up looking like I wanted them to look, and I like the look of the lead belcher areas here with that Nuln oil on it, that heavy coating of Nuln oil. I really like how that just kind of came out kind of grimy. I left this a little more shiny, although I did, if you'll notice, I did sponge on some brighter silver just to give it a little bit of tonal variation, but I wanted that to be a little brighter and a little shinier, so that it just looked different. But yeah, this will do. I'm quite happy with the whole deal with this. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you're still watching at this point and hearing this. Thank you for hanging in for the whole video. I am most grateful. And if you've watched this whole series, triple thank you for watching it. And if you've not watched it, go back, look at the playlist that this is in. There's 2 more episodes of the painting the cockpit and the construction, and then doing the base painting. So if you missed those, be sure and check those out. And thank you for supporting this channel, for watching and for liking and for leaving comments, and I appreciate any shares. Of course, there's a subscribe button down this way. You know where that's at. If you've not already done so, please click that and the little bell icon so you'll know when I have new videos coming out. If you are on any social media groups or things like that, there's some links down below where you can connect with me there. There's also a link to Patreon if you would like to check that out. And if you are already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for your support, and it just means so much to me. It's why I can build this model. There's no way I could build this without Patreon support. So I am so very thankful for that. And my family and I are very grateful and appreciate you coming alongside us so that I can do this and share this with people. And hopefully they get some enjoyment out of watching these videos. And as I always like to do, I'll leave you with one final thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.